He had stepped away from the podium years ago. Cameras turned to others, the headlines shifted focus, and the chair once called the most powerful in the world was now occupied by someone who seemed determined to undo not only his legacy, but perhaps democracy itself. And yet, Barack Obama sat in silence, his back to the window of his post-presidency office in Washington, eyes fixed not on the present, but on what had been buried before it could detonate. What began as a whisper in the intelligence community had metastasized into something far more insidious. The 2016 election was no longer a footnote in history, it was a fault line. And the Russia dossier, once dismissed as political theater, had clawed its way back into the spotlight. Obama had been briefed on it before he left office, every page, every accusation, every coded signal that hinted at foreign interference not only tolerated but perhaps invited. He had warned the nation once, cautiously, respectfully, as a president who believed in the institutions of power. But now? Now he was just a man. And the institutions he'd trusted were no longer acting like themselves. The country had changed. The media screamed, but no one listened. Congress convened hearings, but no one stayed long enough to hear the truth. And the justice system, well, it now waited for orders like a soldier unsure of who its commander was. Then came the leak. It was a Tuesday morning when an anonymous drop landed in the inboxes of major newsrooms, unredacted, uncompromising, and undeniable. Pages from the Russia dossier, cross-referenced with newly uncovered NSA intercepts, showing patterns of communication, coded language, and connections that made collusion feel like a euphemism. The documents were real. And they pointed, not just at Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, but at names no one wanted to believe were involved. But Obama didn't move. Not yet. The leak didn't come from the inside. It came from a journalist in exile, a woman Obama had once helped grant asylum to during his second term. Her name was not on any official payroll. But her digital fingerprints were unmistakable. She was sounding the alarm, and that meant something was deeply wrong. Obama turned to his desk, his fingers grazing the edges of a leather-bound journal. He'd started keeping notes after the Capitol insurrection. Not just to document, but to understand. The country I led, he once wrote, is now the country I study. And it was in that study that he realized something no one in the headlines was asking, why now? Why were these files being leaked not during an election, not during a scandal, but in the quiet lead-up to another campaign year? The answer came in the form of a message, cryptic, secure, and terrifying. A former intelligence analyst, someone buried deep inside the system, had broken silence. They're trying again, it read. But this time, they know how to hide it better. They wasn't just Russia. It was the enablers. The voices in media who downplayed the threat. The officials who turned over. The donors who cared more about tax cuts than the Constitution. And the voters who stopped believing in the truth because it hurt more than the lie. Obama knew he couldn't run for office. He couldn't command a military or sign an executive order. But he had one thing no one could take from him, the moral weight of having once stood in the center of power, and having walked away with his integrity intact. He picked up the phone. Not to call an old advisor. Not to schedule an interview. But to speak to someone no one would expect, a young whistleblower from the Department of Homeland Security who had been recently fired after sounding alarms about foreign data anomalies in swing state precincts. Her story had been buried, until now. Do you still want to be heard? He asked her. There was silence on the other end. Then, I've been waiting for someone to listen. Obama looked out the window once more. The city moved below him, unaware of what was coming. The file was thicker than it should have been. Not in paper, but in weight, the digital kind that arrives encrypted, timed to self-destruct if opened by the wrong hands. It had no title, no watermark, no sender. Just a symbol in the corner, a tiny red dot. Obama had seen it before. Years ago, during his final months in office, the CIA had flagged it as a signature from a former NSA cryptographer gone rogue. Back then, it had been dismissed. A ghost in the system. A paranoid fiction. Not anymore. The document opened without a greeting. Line by line, it laid out what had been suspected but never confirmed: deliberate data manipulation in key precincts in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan during the 2016 election. It wasn't the hack of voting machines, it was subtler. Real-time voter suppression techniques, disguised as routine maintenance. Delays that turned away thousands. Glitches that only occurred in majority black districts. Browser warnings on registration sites that weren't warnings at all, but blocks. It wasn't just foreign fingerprints this time. The metadata showed domestic server routes. The cyber sabotage had come from inside the house. Obama stared at the screen, jaw set. He wasn't angry, yet. He was calculating. There was a difference. Rage was what they wanted. Rationality? That still scared them. He stood and walked across the room, the soft creak of the floorboards grounding him in reality. Outside, across the Potomac, the Capitol shimmered in artificial calm. But inside that glowing dome were men and women who either didn't know, or pretended not to. He remembered the 2016 briefing like it had happened yesterday. James Clapper, John Brennan, and Susan Rice had sat across from him, each face strained with information they couldn't yet verify. The Steele dossier had just surfaced. Clapper, always cautious, warned against overreaction. Brennan, ever the hawk, had already declared it a matter of national security. Rice had looked at Obama and simply said, "They're in." And Obama, stoic, rational, deliberate, had made the hardest decision of his presidency, to say less. "We can't be seen as interfering," he had said at the time. "If we go public, they'll accuse us of tilting the election." So he stayed silent. And Trump won. Now, 8 years later, the consequences of that silence had returned with claws sharper than before. And they carried a message: do something. Or we will. The message had been sent to others, too. 2 former staffers reached out that evening. One had been working for a progressive watchdog group, the other, quietly embedded in a conservative think tank, collecting whispers from within. They'd both received the same alert: coded snippets of new digital infrastructure being installed in rural precincts. Voting software funded by shell corporations. Terms like Pinecone Protocol and Project Helix kept recurring, terms that hadn't existed a month ago, but now filled internal white papers across cybersecurity circles. Obama met with both staffers in a nondescript office in Georgetown. No Secret Service. No press. Just a silent recorder placed in the center of the table. "I don't need hearsay," he told them. "I need patterns. I need connections. And I need names." He wasn't calling on the intelligence community yet. That bridge had burned when the new administration took over and installed loyalists at every level. He needed a different network now: journalists, tech whistleblowers, community organizers. He needed the same people who had made his first campaign possible: the believers, the coders, the truth diggers. One of them, a data analyst from MIT, had already reconstructed parts of the electoral map based on internal machine logs from 2020. What he found chilled Obama more than the Russia memos ever had. There were traces of a new kind of interference, not foreign, not domestic, but contracted. Private security firms hired not by governments, but by megadonors. The democracy industry had been privatized. Back in his office, Obama took to the whiteboard. The map wasn't on any official server. It wasn't color-coded in blues and reds, nor did it carry district lines or demographic overlays. It was built from whispers, compiled by a 28-year-old named Aaliyah Chen who had never set foot in politics but had tracked digital ad footprints with an obsession that bordered on obsession. She had been raised on Obama's speeches, had voted for him in high school mock elections, and now sat at a folding table in the Chicago war room with eyes that hadn't slept in days. She called it the shadow circuit. Her map traced metadata from targeted ads, phone pings from campaign events that never made the news, and black budget flows from firms that didn't exist on paper. It exposed something no one wanted to admit: the election was already underway, and not in the ways anyone expected. What she showed that morning made the room fall into silence. Entire rural counties and swing states had received no federal oversight in their new voting machine contracts. Some precincts had installed poll verification systems that were supposed to speed up voting. Instead, they logged device MAC addresses, then mirrored them. "I think they're building a live signature of voter locations in real time," Aaliyah explained. "Not to suppress votes, but to reroute influence." Obama didn't blink. He simply asked, "Can we trace who's paying for it?" "Only if you're willing to get sued by 5 hedge funds and possibly Amazon Web Services," she replied. Someone chuckled nervously. Obama didn't. He knew how disinformation worked, how it began with suggestion, bloomed through friction, and metastasized in silence. But this was no longer rumor warfare. This was logistics. Infrastructure. And it was already running. He turned to the others. "We can't publish this. Not yet. But we can leak pieces of it, strategically." Journalists, state officials, whistleblowers. He looked toward a former DOJ contact, Rafael Moreno, who had helped take down voter suppression schemes in Florida years ago. Rafael now ran a nonprofit in Nevada that educated immigrant communities on civic rights. "You said you've got precinct-level irregularities?" "Yes," Rafael said, pulling out a flash drive. "And one county official willing to talk, if we can protect her job." Obama nodded. "Good. But make sure she understands, if this goes public, she's not just risking her job. She's risking being called a traitor." A pause. Then Rafael replied, "She already called herself a patriot." Obama smiled. It wasn't a political grin, it was something deeper. A signal that the old fires were still burning beneath his calm. The next step wasn't obvious. The media had grown numb to stories of manipulation. Outrage fatigue. Algorithm blindness. The narrative had to be framed as more than just democracy in danger, it had to be personal. So they found the face, a high school teacher in Georgia whose registration had been flagged 3 times in 2 months, despite a flawless record. Her case had gone viral locally. She'd written letters to her state senator, the governor, even the Justice Department, and never received a response. Until she got a call from a blocked number. A familiar voice asked if she had a moment. "This is President Barack Obama," he said. "I read your letter." She cried before she answered. The team used her case as a wedge. Leaked it to a mid-sized news outlet with credibility and reach. Then quietly ensured that versions of the article were translated into Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Tagalog. Within days, her face appeared in ads not funded by campaigns but by advocacy groups. Obama never appeared with her publicly. He didn't need to. Her story echoed what millions felt, that something was wrong, and no one in power seemed to care. That the air was thick with truth, but the walls never breathed. In the war room, a former tech advisor to the Obama White House brought forward a chilling realization: the new voting infrastructure wasn't just collecting data. It was teaching itself. They're using generative AI to monitor speech patterns at town halls, church meetings, even school board sessions, he said. They're feeding that into models that predict not just how people vote, but how they might. The morning of the address, the sun broke through the clouds over Philadelphia in a way that felt rehearsed, like the sky had been waiting for a moment that mattered. Obama stood backstage at an old Union Hall-turned civic center, his sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed not on the teleprompter, but on a child in the front row. A boy no older than 10, legs dangling from a fold-out chair, holding a cardboard sign in crayon. "Don't let them take it." No one had told the boy what to write. He'd come with his grandmother, who remembered voting before it was truly free, before it was truly fair. Obama smiled gently, as if to say, "I see you." But he also knew who else was watching. Every camera in the room. Every staffer and strategist waiting to pounce. Every cable news producer with a finger on the chirun. Every voice in Washington whispering, "What's he going to say? And how much damage will it do?" Because this time, Obama wasn't just returning to politics. He was walking directly into its deepest fault line. The speech hadn't been shared in advance. Not even with his closest aides. He'd written it by hand on yellow legal pads, then typed it himself in a small Airbnb 2 nights before. The title at the top of the page was simple. The Choice Before U.S. When he stepped to the podium, he didn't begin with policy or statistics. He began with a story. In 2008, we knocked on doors with hope in our hearts. In 2012, we fought to finish what we started. And in 2024, my friends, this fight is no longer about me. It's about you. And what they're trying to make you forget. He paused. Let it land. They want you to believe that democracy is chaos. That freedom is a nuisance. That your voice is disposable unless it echoes theirs. But here's what I know. Fear doesn't build nations. Anger doesn't pave roads or fund schools. And cynicism never saved a single child. The hall fell into complete silence, not out of boredom, but reverence. No one clapped yet. No one moved. He pressed forward. You may be asking, why now? Why speak out again? Why risk my legacy for one more fight? Because this isn't about legacy. This is about the Republic. He pivoted, addressing not just the crowd, but the other man, the one who had mocked institutions, dismantled regulations, and vowed to be the retribution of a movement built on division. Obama never said his name. He didn't have to. Instead, he spoke of a constitution that bled every time power was used for revenge. He spoke of agencies being hollowed out, judges being tested, and facts being bent until they snapped. We used to fight over ideas, he said. Now, we fight over reality. I never believed the arc of history would bend by itself. But I did believe we'd keep our hands on it. Then he said the words that had never appeared in a presidential address, not in war, not in scandal, not even in Watergate. Authoritarianism doesn't arrive with a bang. It walks in while we're distracted. It signs contracts while we're arguing online. It silences when we get tired of shouting. He raised his hand, not for applause, but like a preacher steadying the air. And here's the truth they fear most. You still matter. Your vote still counts. Your presence still terrifies them. Only then did the applause erupt. The boy in the front row stood on his chair. But the speech wasn't done. This isn't a party issue. It's a patriotism issue. And I won't sit quietly while others erase what we built. He called for vigilance, not paranoia. For engagement, not echo chambers. For one final stand, not for him, but for the version of America that believed in ballots more than bullhorns. As he finished, the cameras turned, the headlines formed, and the tweets began. Some called it partisan. Some called it prophetic. And others, especially those in dark corners of government, called it dangerous. Because in 7 minutes, Obama had done what no one else could. He reminded America not just of what it was, but what it could lose. And outside, in the street, a chant began to build, not organized, not rehearsed. Just ordinary citizens repeating one line. Don't let them take it. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A clip, just 28 seconds long, of Obama's speech reached a teacher in Des Moines. Then a single mother in Michigan. Then a retired postal worker in Arizona. No algorithms, no endorsements, no media hype. Just a moment of clarity in a storm of noise. Authoritarianism doesn't arrive with a bang. It walks in while we're distracted. The line passed from phone to phone like a sacred message. Not trending. Not viral. But contagious. And then came the reaction. In the days that followed, silence fractured across America like glass under pressure. Communities that hadn't spoken to one another in years began gathering, in schools, in parks, in union halls. Not in protest. Not in celebration. But in defense. Of what? Of the idea that democracy wasn't just about winning. It was about listening. Obama had not called for riots. He had not named names. He had not thrown punches. But the nation heard him loud and clear. And those who hoped to silence him realized something else. It was already too late. One of the first shocks came from an unlikely place. A Republican mayor in rural Ohio released a statement titled, "I didn't vote for him. But he's right." It read, "I disagreed with Obama's presidency. But I didn't fear it. I fear this one. Because democracy without dignity is just domination. And I didn't serve in the military to see that happen here." His post went viral. So did the backlash. Commentators on right-wing television called Obama a shadow tyrant, a former king trying to reclaim his throne. One anchor claimed, "This is a coup in plain sight, an intellectual one." But even as the rhetoric burned hotter, something else ignited underneath. Momentum. Obama didn't schedule a tour. He didn't launch a campaign. He didn't even release a follow-up. Instead, he walked back into the crowd. No Secret Service motorcade. No teleprompters. In town after town, people gathered to talk. To ask. To remember. And in those gatherings, one truth kept surfacing. We thought we were too tired. We thought we were too late. But maybe we're just on time. Then came the moment no one expected. 1 week after the speech, a former staffer from Trump's first term, an advisor who had once defended every controversial policy, broke ranks on national television. Trembling, she held up a folded yellow legal page. Obama's speech. "I mocked this man," she said, "and I was wrong. I believed power was about control. But now I see it's about protection, of institutions, of people, of truth." The silence didn't just break in that moment. It collapsed. Networks scrambled. Politicians issued statements. Protesters returned to the streets, but this time not with rage, but with resolve. Across the Capitol, a rare bipartisan vote began forming to restore key democratic safeguards, ones weakened in recent years. Some failed. Others passed. But all of it felt different. Because the fear had shifted. Not toward Obama. Not toward Trump. But toward the mirror. People were finally asking. What did we allow? What did we normalize? What will we protect now? And in the quiet corners of Washington, where the deals are made and the promises are traded, another whisper began to echo. We underestimated him again. Because Obama hadn't tried to take back power. He'd reminded the people that they never lost it. In the final shot of this chapter, he walked into a small community library in Indiana, sat with 8 teenagers at a round table, and asked a simple question. What kind of country do you want to inherit? And they answered, not with cynicism, not with hashtags, not with memes, but with stories. Stories about fairness. About justice. About dignity. The next generation had found its voice. Not because of a speech. But because a man once whispered into a storm, and millions whispered back. We hear you. We're still here. And we're ready.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that move the world. Thanks for watching.